Good morning. Please join me in honoring America by standing and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Jack Thompson. I have the pleasure of being the superintendent of schools at Perry, and I'd like to welcome everyone here today. Thank you for coming out in support of our Perry nuclear power plant. As a school organization, we're taught and we work really hard. We lead from the heart, and I would be lying if I didn't say this has been a real tough week for a lot of us in education and for everyone in America. So I would be remiss if I didn't start this morning by first asking us to take a moment of silence and reflect on the most recent tragedy at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School and what those folks are going through right now. Thank you. So, good morning. Let's wrap. Good morning. And it's an exciting time. We're happy to be here. We're going to be very, very informed today by our guests. And so we want to give you guys some time for questions. So we're going to get right to it. And when Commissioner Serino called, and he's been doing so much on behalf of the region, our community, and efforts to keep the plant open, when he called and said, "Hey, would you be willing to host a rally?" We jumped on the opportunity, and we're happy to do that. And it's not just me. Again, we run this district by a number of folks in collaboration, and I would need to and should introduce those that put in hours of time to make sure they give me the guidance so that we can continue to operate an outstanding school district. So I'd like to introduce the board members that have made it here tonight. First, we have Andy Roberts, our Vice President. Tippy Foley, I know you're here, I don't know where this is, in the back. And Ashley Hacking. And I so appreciate the work they do. So, Jerry asked me to talk a little bit about the financial impact of what it would mean if the Perry nuclear plant was to close. And again, when you start talking about school funding, that could be a 4-hour seminar in itself, no questions about it. And this is something that's, it's not just about the plant closing. This district has been surrounded by financial uncertainty for years and years and years, far before I came along. I remember in my final interview 7 years ago when I was fortunate enough to gain this position. During my interview, they found out the latest Biden budget had, or the original version had, they were going to totally take out all of the funding we were getting in what's called the utility tax reimbursement. Because while we talk about the plant, and I'll mention the resources we gain from the tax revenue of the plant, the real issue we fight is the utility tax reimbursement. Because back in the day when deregulation occurred, it was going to punch a hole in our ability to operate all financially. And so what happened is they did what was called then a hold harmless, where I think it was 12 or 13 million at the time. They continued to fund us, and so we kept moving on, and we were fine. But then later, when they started doing the phase out of tangible personal property tax, that also began phasing out. And so that night they had said that the whole 12 million was gone, and they asked me a question out of the blue: what would we do if we just got $12 million less money? And I said the same thing I would say today, that the school system and this community and the specialness of this region is not in the money we receive, it's in the people that live here. And that's why I feel so blessed to be a part of not only Perry, but Northeast Ohio. I was born and raised in Northeast Ohio, lived here all my life, and the fear I have is that my kids aren't going to have that same opportunity. Because the real problem that I see is the fact that we can't supply our kids with the reason and the careers and the jobs for our best and brightest to stay here. And I know Representative Young's talked a little bit about that, and it's certainly something that we're worried about and we see. Last night I was talking to one of our fine students that graduated from Perry that is now at MIT, Kelsey Sippis, and she told me if I mentioned her, she would throw up, so watch out if you're sitting by. But, you know, she's doing a wonderful job, and she's been able to get a position where she's covering the story. And they were nice enough to fly her out here, and so we're getting some great coverage. But she's just one of the many examples of the outstanding students and people that our community is able to build and create, and we just can't keep them here. So certainly the plant, the sad part about the plant is we've got 700 outstanding employees that work at that plant that have families in this community that if that plant decides to go dark, might not be able to stay here. And so while the $2 million that we receive in tax revenue that would certainly provide challenges for us as a school district, the real concern is losing those wonderful people that work there. So at this point in time, and again, we need to thank them because what I know, and I'm not the expert, the Perry Nuclear Power Plant is a young, viable plant that just happens to be one of the most efficient run plants in the nation. So let's give those people a round of applause here today. So there we are. And that's why I tend to be optimistic, because I believe in the people that are in Northeast Ohio, and I believe in us. And so while we will have challenges, which is represented here today, we have the support that we can get through many, many hardships. And so I appreciate you all being here. Again, you can be assured that as a district, and like I said, the job has been happening well before my time, they've done their due diligence. I see a number of prior board members that are in the audience today, and they have worked very, very hard to make sure that while we're fiscally responsible, we have $20 million in savings, we have $10 million set aside for capital improvements for the next 10 years. We've planned ahead, but that doesn't mean it's going to be an easy road. And so we're committed to continue to save money, to do what we can to be efficient in our spending, but continue to provide the outstanding and excellent programs that our kids have been able to enjoy in the past, and they will in the present, and they're going to in the future. So thank you. At this time, it's my honor to introduce Commissioner Serino. And he has been so active in Washington and Columbus, and future here he's going to be in Philadelphia to make sure that our voices are heard. And so I really look forward to hearing today from Commissioner Serino. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks again to the school and the school board for allowing us to use this fine theater for our venue today. We have a lot of officials from around the county here, and we didn't have a sign-up sheet, so I don't want to risk missing anybody. So I do appreciate the support from all of the officials from around Lake County, particularly those around the Perry community. But I do want to mention my colleague Dan Troy from the County Commissioners, who is sitting up in front here. So let's give Dan a applause. How many of you actually work at Perry at the plant? Raise your hand. And how many of you leave your hands up, how many of you are families of people who work in the plant? Raise your hand. Great, great. Well, I think you have skin in the game, as they say. And I too want to echo Jack's comments in thanking all of the workers at Perry, for many of you back since 1987. And I have tradespeople in my family who actually worked on building the facility in the 80s. And it has become a very important part of our community. As I was driving east on Route 2 this morning, as I often do, you can't miss looking at the plume from the power plant, right? And I looked at that this morning and I thought to myself, it's not just a power plant generating 11%, along with Davis-Besse, 11% of the electricity in Ohio. It's an economic machine for this community, and it has been for quite some time. We really have to look at it with that perspective. So this morning, the reason we thought it would be good to have this meeting and rally here this morning, and I'll talk a little bit more later about the timing of some things, but it's really important that we share with the community where we are, what we can expect in the very near future, I believe, and more importantly, what are the things we can do in the meantime to try to influence the final decisions that, if made in the wrong way, could be catastrophic for us here. So today really is a day to have our voices heard, maybe not one last time, but certainly one of the last times. And I'm going to talk a little bit later, after our featured speaker, about what it is we all can do as citizens in this community in terms of trying to yet continue to influence decisions that might be made at both the federal and at the state level. First, I want to begin with talking about the economic impact. And Jack talked a bit about the impact on the schools, certainly. 700 plus people. Between Perry Nuclear Plant and Davis-Besse, those two plants produce $510 million of GDP for the state of Ohio every year. Of course, we understand the losses in tax revenue that would result. Real estate taxes for the plant itself. If it becomes non-utilized or not utilized in the same fashion, there will be impediments to the current real estate value. The utility tax that Jack mentioned, which we all got hit with last fall, all the way out to Willoughby Eastlake, and the city of Eastlake got hit because of an impairment of First Energy's tax return and the value of their assets. Sales tax from normal commerce that is going on. Bed tax. A lot of people come and visit the plant when they're doing refueling or maintenance activities, and the bed tax is what fuels the budget for us at the county level to support economic development activities. And obviously impact on the fire service and levies all around the county. And there's also, in addition to the 700 jobs directly employed by the plant, there's probably well in excess of 500 more jobs related to companies that are existing to service the plant, whether it's services or products, repairs, etc. And here's a number that just shocked the heck out of me when I first saw it. The annual spend with local vendors just in Lake County, annual, is $65 million. That if the plant were to shutter, that's largely going to go away. Another thing that we've seen as I've studied some of the closures in other parts of the country, communities also see when a nuclear plant is announced to be closing or decommissioned entirely, that there's a loss of population for obvious reasons. A lot of the workers are trained and experienced in the nuclear field, and so they're going to go someplace else and leave the area. In Lake County, as my colleague Commissioner Troy knows, is our population has been rather flat for a very, very long time, at around 2.25. And we don't want to see in the county any further denigration of that. But it's very likely that if the plant were to close, that there would be a substantial loss of population. And of course, property valuations, when you've got people that are looking to relocate quickly, to sell quickly, potentially foreclosures, those are things that are on top of the employment and the obvious economic impacts on the county. These are rather substantial things that will impact us in a big way. So, what have we done so far? Well, you've heard in the papers and read in the papers a lot about the bills in Columbus. I like to call them Zen 1 and Zen 2, which are which would, if passed, would provide some relief to the operator for zero emissions, which nuclear, of course, is. That is going back and forth through negotiations. I do want to recognize Senator John Eklund, who could not be here today, who has been out in the forefront of this very, very early last year and has taken a lot of hits for supporting some solution here. But he has just been very courageous in his support, as has Representative Young with the Zen 2 bill. We've been out, Jack was with me, Superintendent Thompson was with me in Washington at the Energy Department. We met with the Undersecretary for Nuclear Affairs. We had a great all-day meeting with them. We have met with the then chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Chairman Chatterjee, that Congressman Joyce, who has also been very supportive, arranged for us, been to the White House for a couple of briefings. And this coming Tuesday, one of my colleagues from Ottawa County, where Davis Bessie resides, he and I are going to be traveling to Philadelphia to meet with PJM, who will be making the final recommendation to FERC within a few weeks, we believe, on what the impact would be of closures, either Perry and or Davis Bessie. So we have a lot at stake, and there's still a lot of things that we can do. We're not going to give up. At least I don't think you want us to give up, do you? Should we keep trying? Are you ready to help us keep trying? Okay. Before I introduce and I'll be coming back to talk about what we all can do after our featured speaker, and before I introduce our speaker, I do want to introduce Ron Young, Representative Ron Young, who is co-sponsor of the Zen 2 bill. He'd like to make a few comments before we proceed.
Well, I've worked closely here in Perry. Well, good morning, everybody, first of all. For years now, with Superintendent Thompson, Chief McDonald, Wally Siegel, Karen Sunday now, on ways to improve life here in Perry. Whether it's the shoreline, break walls, more funding for the schools. We're working hard on that. In fact, we have a pretty big asset, little bonus pouring in at the end of June, right? Beginning of July. All right. At any rate, we've worked hard with Perry. And this issue is certainly critically important to Perry. It's critically important to Perry. And if it's important to Perry, it's important to me, these gentlemen, and many others in the audience here. But this is not just a Perry issue. As a state representative, I need to take a little bit broader view. This is a regional issue, and it's an Ohio issue as well. We need to convince our neighbors, other counties, other regions of the state, that this is important to everyone, to all of us as Ohioans. And why do I say that? Well, just very briefly, I don't want to take any of Mr. Leidig's time. But just one thing, just consider this, energy diversity. Ohio is currently an importer of electricity. We import more electricity than we generate here in Ohio. And that certainly means line loss, means that when the product is delivered, it's probably a little bit more expensive than it is when it's where it's generated from, number one. Number two, what does it mean if nuclear goes away in Ohio? And that's really what we're talking about here. Both Ohio nuclear plants generate about 15 to 20% of Ohio's total energy output. What does it mean if those two assets go away? It means we're going to be extremely dependent upon natural gas as the fuel to power our generators. Now, what does that mean? What would you do if you sold natural gas and you knew that you were basically the only players in town? Coal is on the ropes. Coal's got serious problems right now. So we're left with natural gas. What do we call that? There's an old term for that you don't like much to hear about in the marketplace, right? What's it called? I think it's a monopoly, right? And what happens when there's a monopoly? Prices go up. Prices go up. So all of our neighbors here surrounding us, Geauga, Cuyahoga, etc., they ought to be extremely interested in Perry's plight, because it's going to hit them as well. This is a huge issue. We can't just look at this provincially and say, oh, you know, we can let Perry go. What's Perry mean to me? Perry means a great deal to me, but to others outside of Lake County, maybe it doesn't mean so much. But let's look at the sources of our power. Let's look at the future, what it may cost Ohioans to power our manufacturing plants, to power our schools. Prices will go up dramatically if we allow these two assets to go away. So I think that's one of the reasons we're all here fighting for this, and that's one of the reasons why we're trying to rally Ohio and our governor behind it. Thank you for being here this morning. You're doing good stuff. Keep it up.
Thank you, Representative Young. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Gary Leidig. Gary is a guy who has a past here in Perry. Actually lived here and worked here. He was retired from First Energy in 2011. He was Executive Vice President of First Energy and President of First Energy Generation Company, so he knows this operation very, very well. He's a respected consultant in the energy field. Is going to talk to us a little bit about why it doesn't make sense for Ohio to abandon nuclear energy generation. So let's give a warm welcome to Gary Leidig.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Serino, and a couple of these guys kind of stole my thunder already, but and Dr. Thompson, appreciate the hospitality. It's really great to be here this morning, and it's bittersweet in many ways. I set foot on the property in 10 Center Road in April of 1974, and put about 10 years of my early career into construction and operational testing of the plant before I moved on into the rest of First Energy, at that time the illuminating company, of course. So I do have a long history here at the plant and a pretty significant passion for not only the plant, the people, and nuclear technology. I do need to say at the outset that obviously I'm not representing First Energy, and while I could offer a lot of color commentary probably, that's not why we're here today. The reason we're here today is to talk about nuclear energy and to talk more specifically about the Perry plant. And in that regard, I thank you all for coming out, for your support for the future of Perry. It's very important. I kind of want to set the stage a little bit, very briefly, to talk about the role of the Perry plant and all the nuclear energy in the United States. Nuclear power plants are baseload generation. Now what that means is they're on all the time. And when you look at the statistics and the numbers, the track record, particularly for nuclear power, is unbelievable, with capacity factors in excess of 90%. They're basically on all the time at full power, come down for refueling once every couple of years, move the fuel around, come back up again and run for another 2 years. And I would note that the team here at Perry today is continuing to set records in terms of online, safe and reliable operation. So there's no question regarding the efficiency and the effectiveness and the reliability. And you know, when was the last time we talked about nuclear safety? Right? It's a given. It's a given in our business, and particularly here in the United States, we're extraordinarily successful in terms of nuclear safety. So the role of Perry fits is on all the time. Now, most of you are probably aware that the load, the electricity load, swings substantially. In fact, it's about twice during the day what it is at nighttime. So those base load units, and historically those have been nuclear plants and large fossil plants, large coal-fired plants. Those base load units are on all the time. And then the way the system operator works, and PJM and First Energy operate the electric system, the way the system works is they put on additional generation as the load grows up. So for example, in the morning and then later in the afternoon when the load peaks, we're almost at maximum generation. The generation that comes on last is the most expensive. And historically that's been natural gas plants, because historically natural gas has been the most expensive fuel, and it's also been the plants that have the least amount of efficiency. And that's a measure of heat rate, their overall efficiency from the thermodynamic standpoint. So over the years, you know, Perry, nuclear energy in general, and large coal plants have carried the basic load. And all the swings occur for the other facilities. Now that picture is obviously changing. And by the way, I hope you appreciate that electricity is on demand, and the load and the generation has to match exactly every single second. Most people sort of don't get that. You can't put it in the box in the basement, right? There's no electricity tank in your home. Maybe someday we'll crack the code on storage. People are working on batteries. There's a number of things out there that are experimental. But at this point in time, the generation that the companies produce has to match the load every single instant. In fact, if it doesn't match the load, the lights go out, and it doesn't happen very often, obviously. So that important feature causes all the generation to move up and down 24/7, all right? So in that, and Representative already talked about it, in that we need fuel diversity. We need a mixture of different kinds of fuels, different kinds of efficiencies to overall reduce our risk, particularly from an economic standpoint. And we talked about how much nuclear provides energy. In the United States, about 20%, okay? And here in Ohio, the number is actually 14% as of the end of 2016. So we're pretty typical of what happens in terms of generation with nuclear. Now, here in Ohio, historically over the years, the bulk of the generation has come from coal-fired facilities. At its peak, Ohio ran almost 90% of its generation came from coal plants. That was about 10 years ago. Obviously, that is changing. And as already noted, coal's under a pretty substantial amount of pressure right now, and has been. A fair amount of that is environmental. Obviously, the previous administration was pretty bearish on coal. The EPA was issuing a lot of regulations. Some of that has tailed back a little bit, but the economics are still a challenge for coal-fired power plants. And as a result, many utilities, including First Energy, have shut down their coal facilities as well. So that changes this picture. All right? So nuclear is still there with base load, but that coal has by and large been replaced by natural gas. So now those natural gas plants are running more often than they used to. And the trade-off is coal for natural gas, and first blush would say, well, that's not a bad deal. We've got ample natural gas, and we do. Well, the Marcellus and Utica shales have been very robust in terms of getting gas out of the shales. However, there are a few other things that we need to be mindful of. First of all, gas does emit carbon. Now, some of these facilities call themselves the clean energy plants. Okay, I get that, but we clearly could call Perry a clean energy plant on a relative basis. Natural gas is about 50% of coal in terms of carbon emissions, but it's not zero. So the trade-off between coal and natural gas makes some sense. If gas is available, that works fine. Well, let's talk a bit about availability, okay? We've been drilling out of the Marcellus and Utica shales now for about the last 10 years. And that number has increased in that last 10 years. The amount of gas coming out of those shales has gone up 19 times. So it's a very robust source for natural gas. But we've got to get it where it needs to be. As a result of that, there are about a dozen pipelines under construction in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio right now. Some of those have been permitted. Some of those are a big challenge. As you can imagine, let's put a gas pipeline through your front yard, please. So there's all that going on, and there's a lot of challenges with that, but those pipelines have to be there. The other thing that's important to note about natural gas, unlike both coal and nuclear, is that the fuel actually draws from the pipeline in real time. So pipeline capacity is adequate. The plant's located on the pipeline. They draw the fuel as they generate electricity. All is good. There are some pockets of gas storage, but it's pretty modest. So the pipelines need to be where the power plants are. And I'll just offer one little story about that. And it's actually a story that happened in January this year, January 4th, 5th, and 6th in New England. And you may be aware that New England has shut down a couple of their nuclear power plants. They don't have very much coal-fired generation up in New England. They rely pretty heavily on natural gas. Now, admittedly, they are not on the Marcellus Shale with a rich resource. And secondly, they have a lot of challenges building pipelines for natural gas in New England. It's difficult to get anything built in New England, as you can appreciate. So, in early January, we had a cold spell. Well, the way it works with natural gas is industry, commercial, and residential customers had first call on the natural gas in the pipeline. So you at your home get an early first call. That's because you pay retail rates for natural gas. All right? The utilities pay wholesale rates for gas. So they are lower on the pecking order, if you will, in terms of availability of the pipeline. So we have had numerous instances in the United States over the past 10 to 20 years where we essentially run out of natural gas. The cold spell comes along, the heat load goes up, particularly residential heat, everybody turns all their gas furnaces on, pipeline depletes, and there's essentially nothing left for generation. And that actually occurred in New England in early January. And the fix was pretty interesting, particularly from a historical perspective. The fix was that the New England ISO, who has responsibility for operating the system, had on reserve a number of oil-fired generating plants. And for a couple of days, oil-fired power plants, old ones, very old ones, sort of saved the day and were able to keep the lights on in New England. That's how it works. That's how the electric system works. And that's the importance of fuel diversity, if you will. The coal situation here in Ohio has changed again from 90%. Last year it was 58% coal. So I wouldn't bet on coal going completely away, okay? And that's a dilemma, if you will, for the operators and how that plays out. Historically, coal's been 50% of the capacity of the United States, has been for the last 100 years. In the past 5 to 7 years, it's dwindled now down to last year it was 37%. But I don't think coal's going to disappear completely. The more efficient plants, the bigger plants, they're going to probably make it. There will be some environmental pressures and some additional cost pressures. But that fuel diversity is very important. If you think about fuel in a nuclear plant, we have a 2-year refuel cycle. The uranium and the fuel assemblies are put together 4 and 2 years ahead of time and shipped to the, so there is no fuel challenge in a nuclear plant. All right, the cost of the uranium is the only thing that's kind of even interesting, all right? For a coal plant, we had cases where the frozen coal pile would be our victim. So you have coal, and we would have challenges with the weather. So I lived through some of that early in my career. For natural gas, it's real time. The other thing I want to mention is renewables. And we talked about the zero emission credits, and again, New York and Illinois have done a good job of recognizing the importance of those because nuclear is a zero emitter. The other zero emitters out there are wind and solar plants. And while there's a big push for renewables, and most people recognize the importance of renewables, theoretically and actually it is free fuel, and it is part of our natural environment. The thing that's most important to recognize is remember what I said 10 minutes ago, which is for every kilowatt hour that's produced and consumed, there has to be an exact match in real time. So the truth is, when the sun goes down, that solar generator stops. So there needs to be something there to be able to deal with that in real time. It's not a matter of, gentlemen, start your engines and 15 minutes later. It's in real time. So the whole electric system operates with a reserve on it to be able to accommodate those reductions. Now, we, unfortunately, are not blessed with a lot of sun here. In fact, when the sun comes out, everybody wonders, what's going on, right? But the reality is, in those areas where there is a lot of solar energy, particularly in Arizona and California, the operators kind of have their hands full, because when the sun comes out, the loads are generally not at its peak. In fact, the sun starts to dwindle, the energy from the solar starts to dwindle in the late afternoon as the load begins to pick up. So the operators back down natural gas plants while the sun arrives, and then run them back up again. So renewable is very good. It's public policy. It's incentivized very heavily by both the federal and state governments. The subsidies are extraordinary. It's investment tax credit of about 30%, and operational tax credit in real time for every kilowatt hour generated by a wind turbine or a solar generator. There's a tremendous amount of incentive. It's about $28 a megawatt hour. And for those of you in the business, that's about the cost of running a nuclear plant. And that's the incentive. Okay, so there's a tremendous amount of work going on with renewables. It's not a big issue here in Ohio, just based on the natural resources. Somebody once did a calculation and said if we wanted to replace Perry, which is a huge plant. By the way, Perry is the second largest reactor in the United States. And we talked earlier about efficiency. At 1,200 plus megawatts, it is one of the most efficient plants in the country as well, and one of the newest, even though it goes back to the 80s in terms of its in-service date. So to walk away from that perfectly good operating facility just, it sort of doesn't even pass the snicker test, if you will. But anyway, we've got all these sources out there, and public policy supports renewables. Okay, fair enough. Where's the public policy support for the other zero emitter, which is nuclear energy? Now, right now, we are facing a situation where gas is coming in, and we're sitting on the shale gas, and it is pretty inexpensive, and I think there could be an economic impact. But right now, 15% of the energy in Ohio comes from nuclear. Forget about the trade-off for a minute between coal and natural gas. Let's assume that all goes to natural gas. So that means 85% of the generation in Ohio is natural gas, and 15 is nuclear. So without nuclear, where are we? Well, we are all in on natural gas. And the real question is, with any energy source, do we want to be all in? And I would submit the answer is absolutely not. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll be glad to take questions, and we may have some answers. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. Very, very instructive. We will have time for questions afterwards. Okay, so Superintendent Thompson, Dr. Jack. His comments were very positive and hopeful, and Gary's comments were instructive and helping us understand a little bit more about energy policy and why Ohio should not go down this path. Now comes the sobering part of our discussion this morning. One of the reasons why we wanted to have this gathering today is that we're on a very critical path, on a very short time frame before decisions are going to be made. And I'm going to give you some of my own speculation here. Most of this, none of it is inside information. It's what's been out there published. But there are things that we should expect, I believe, in the next 4 to 6 weeks, which is why it's critical that when we get to the call to action in a few minutes, that we all respond to it. While we're looking forward to the trip to PJM next week, the odds are not in our favor. It is sort of conventional wisdom right now that PJM is predisposed against keeping the plants open, Perry and Davis-Besse. That they sort of believe that the grid is safe and secure with other sources of electricity. But we're still going to go and make our case and try to influence that decision. But it's the odds, I think, are long and certainly not in our favor. So very likely we could see in the next 4 to 6 weeks a decision from them, which would be in the form of their answers to questions and recommendation back to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who asked them to do this, that there is no need to step in and take any action to keep the plants operating. There could very likely also be an announcement by First Energy or First Energy Solutions, I should say, that the plants will be closed. We all know it's been written in the papers, in the balance of the media, that there's $100 million of bonds related to the plants that are coming due in early April. And the ratings of those bonds have already been downgraded, believed to likely to default. So if that happens, that's a pretty likely situation from everything that we are hearing and reading. It would not be a big surprise to find a bankruptcy proceeding to go into place after that. Again, we don't know the answer to all of these things. None of these are mutually exclusive. Some of these could happen, all of them can happen, but they would all basically involve a significant reduction in the operations from one extent to another. Now, that's what we should look to see in the next 4 to 6 weeks if nothing changes. Or we can continue to pursue a couple of solutions, and we're going to continue pursuing the federal solutions. But again, I think the odds are long there. As our speaker noted, the governors and legislative bodies in Illinois and New York have already made decisions to recognize the zero emissions and provide support to keep their plants open and the economies of their communities where these plants reside alive and well. And it looks like New Jersey is on the cusp of that being done as well. And our governor in our legislature can also take steps to secure at the state level Ohio's nuclear energy generator and the important key economics to our communities. Whether it's Zen 1, Zen 2, or Zen 3, or I don't care what it's called, and it doesn't matter exactly what the components are, but we've got to get the people together to come and figure out the right solution here so that the pain is shared. There will be pain with something like this, but the pain needs to be shared, and it needs to be done in a way that satisfies the, as Gary so well pointed out, the need to balance our sources of energy and electricity generation in our state and not devastate the communities in Ottawa County and Lake County. And Gary, I think, made a great case for why Ohio's taking a big risk in being all in on natural gas. I won't rehash all of the economic impacts. I already talked about those. But one of the things that we can't really quantify on top of all of the tax revenue losses and sales taxes and other things that we would see, think about the impact on the families. Many of you here today are families or employees of the nuclear power plant. I don't think that all of our state officials fully appreciate that and understand the impact on the families. And we have representatives from the media here today, and I'm sure they would like to hear from you when we're finished, to get comments from you on what the impact might be for your family, your extended family, and your community as well. So be sure to take some time afterwards to find the media. They'll be appropriately placed so you can tell your stories here. So today, the call to action is actually pretty simple. We're pursuing the federal side of things, and we'll have answers on that pretty quickly. But I think what we need to do now is do what Illinois and New York and New Jersey have done, and that is put the ultimate pressure on our governor and our legislators. They are the ones who could actually step in and resolve this issue for us. Governor Kasich needs to hear from us. I hate to say this, but it appears as though he has abandoned our community. He needs to hear from us, and he needs to hear from us today, tomorrow, Monday, and Tuesday, until this thing is resolved. He needs to hear from us. Here's some questions you can ask him. Why are you ignoring our community? Why will you not meet with us and our officials? How could you be called the jobs governor and ignore the devastation that would happen in both Lake County and Ottawa County? Why are you not exercising leadership, seeing a problem that is going to be devastating to two very large communities? And why don't you get the parties together in your office, lock the door, and not let them out until this thing gets resolved and the pain is appropriately shared so that everybody has skin in the game? And the last question I would ask the governor, will you come to Perry and see what will happen to us without your intervention? These are simple questions, and they're questions that need to be asked. Our governor is an elected official, elected by all of the state of Ohio, and both Lake County and Ottawa County and the communities that reside there and our respective economies deserve the attention from our governor, and we need to deliver that message to him ASAP. So he can solve this problem for us with some good leadership. All we're asking for is the same kind of leadership we've seen in Illinois, New York, and New Jersey. And by the way, I should mention that one of the reasons that I'm negative on the probabilities of getting a federal solution is because of those three states. If you look at the total grid in the Midwest and Northeast, those plants are now protected. They're not concerned about going offline, and they don't need federal help to help them stay alive. And so when the feds are looking at the total grid and the resiliency of the grid, and I think Gary would agree, that they now look at those plants as being safe and secure, whose output is virtually guaranteed, right? And what does that do? Because of our lack of activity in Ohio, that renders us, from a federal perspective, at a real disadvantage. we look expendable because those plants and their operations are now secure because their states have taken appropriate action. I don't like us being in that position. We are where we are, but there's still time to get it resolved. I would suggest that when you leave this place today, that you either go to the governor's website and make contact, call his office, email. You can go to my Facebook page, for those of you that do Facebook, Sereno Commissioner, and I have a link posted this morning so that you can get the information on how to send emails or make phone calls to the governor's office, and of course all of your state representatives, some of whom are here today. I think that together with one voice, we do have this one last chance to stop decisions that will be permanent, devastating, and very soon. I thank you for your interest today in coming out here on a Saturday morning. This was a great crowd. It's great testimony to the community of Perry and all of Lake County. What we'd like to do now is Jack and I and Gary would take any questions that you have. We have some microphones that'll be spread around here by the students. And I thank you, and again, please leave here today and go get the information either on my Facebook page or on the governor's website and make some calls, send emails, tell your story. One thing we don't want are form letters, because I've been the recipient of many of those. After the first dozen, you pretty much ignore them, okay? Tell your personal story. Don't make it long, and certainly please be professional. Don't be angry. Tell your story. How is this going to impact you? Let the governor make a connection to the people in our Perry community and Lake County community who will be affected by his lack of action and leadership at this time. And we hope that he will come to our rescue and keep our community alive here. Thank you very much, and we'll be happy to take some questions. Thank you. I can't see too well out there, but if you have a question, raise your hand. Yes, sir. Stand up and we'll get a microphone to you.
Obviously, there's two very distinct issues here that are so related. One, it's hard for me to imagine that we want to give up one source of power that someday may be very important to us to have, and also for purposes of keeping power cost efficient so we can attract businesses. But the part that really I hope Ron can help answer for me is when we have our legislatures and our governor who are so strong on wanting to bring new business to Ohio, and are willing to spend money to do that and invest in that, how can you walk away from an existing business and not spend the same kind of money to keep the same jobs that you would work real hard to attract? You know, being involved in the Chamber of Commerce for so many years, you talked about the retention of business was equally, if not more important, than going out and getting new. So how could that argument not just make a lot of sense to protect all those jobs, to make the investment to do that? Casey probably all over this.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great question. Thank you. Ron, go ahead.
Well, just to be totally transparent, the problem is that we're asking the people to pay for it. You know, that's going to increase their bills. That's extremely difficult for a conservative legislature to support. Senator Eklund is totally on board with it. I'm a co-sponsor of it. That puts us at serious risk in any election cycle. The issue is too important to walk away from, as you say, Rick. I understand. And that's why we've done what we've done. And that's the problem the governor has. That's the problem the legislature has right now. And that's what I was getting at briefly when I was talking about the impact on the region and on Ohio in total. Because we have 99 state representatives, 33 senators. Why does somebody in Cincinnati give a hoot about what happens in Perry, Ohio, or Lake County? So I think they need to see the big picture, as was just presented, that this is going to impact the whole state in a serious way. But what Commissioner Serino is describing is critically important and just brilliant, if you will. Because the folks in Columbus have hearts. The governor has a heart. He cares about people. And if he sees letters coming across his desk from people that are engaged, that care, that are respectful, and he can get a feel for how it's impacting their families, their communities, their localities, he'll react, I believe. There's a much greater chance he'll react. I certainly can't guarantee that. But he has not to this point. So I think that's the best answer I can give you.
Just so everyone knows, the bill that's currently in front of Columbus right now, the Zem bill, Zem 2 as I call it, if it were to remain intact as it is, would result in something like $2.50 or slightly less per household in their electricity rates through a tariff that would be added to the bill. $2.50, and for businesses, it would be a maximum of I think it's $3,500, something close to that. Now, $2.50 per household, and for people on fixed incomes, retired people, et cetera, I understand that's meaningful. But think about, with all of the taxes that will go away in all of our communities, keep in mind what will likely happen, and it would vary around the county, but there will be, if services are to be kept the way they are currently, service levels in all the communities, that there's going to be levies, there's going to be increases in things that are going to be well in excess of $2.50, a month to a residential customer. And we've had a lot of pushback I've had pushback from what would normally be considered my constituency, the businesses around. And the business lobby in Ohio has been very, very active against any kind of remedy here. They like to say things like, well, we shouldn't be subsidizing First Energy or nuclear power. Well, the point of the fact is that energy sources and generators have been subsidized in one shape or another for a long, long time and continue to be, whether it's through tax incentives or through grants, et cetera, from the government. So this is not new, and this is not a bailout of a company. This is keeping our community intact economically, and that's why we have to take action at this point. I can't see too well, sorry. Yes? Up in the middle?
When the plant was constructed and first went online, the tax base was diverted down the southern transmission line. I noticed we're interested in what, is that still going on? The real estate taxes being distributed, part of the evaluation down the transmission line? If so, why aren't the other communities engaged in this activity?
I believe the answer is yes, they are continuing. I'm sorry, Dan, did you want to add something?
Yeah, what they did is they capped the tangible personal property tax base at a certain value, and that would go to what's called the Citus district, which was Perry. And then anything over and above that amount would be diverted to everybody else that was receiving energy from the grid that Perry was part of. I think that was about 42 counties. And that went out at a 20/80, 10/90, 0/100 over a 3-year period. So yeah, there was a lot of tax value that moved to other taxable entity school districts, et cetera, in 42 other counties. Now, as we know, that tangible personal value has shrunk considerably since that was done in 1988. I mean, and that was something we fought very hard, Senator Boggs and I, and at the time Representative Hagan, to keep that from happening. But, we were outnumbered there. We were considered very greedy up here trying to hold on to that money. So I think it's a good argument to present to these people, hey, you are sharing in some of the riches or some of the value of this plan. You ought to get behind supporting keeping this thing operating.
That's a great point, and we should get more support from them. And while we're talking about support, why aren't we getting greater support from the environmental groups? Okay, I mean, zero emissions should be a relevant topic to those folks. And
Most people look at their wallet first, and I don't understand why the remaining people who are receiving tax monies aren't as active as you are, and I thank you for your activity in this matter.
You're welcome, thank you. Next question. Yes, sir. Right down here.
The amount of money that we're looking at sharing, or the state household sharing, is $250 per month, right? Is that what's being proposed?
With the current bill, yes.
Okay, so on top of diversity, in not having a backup plan, if we go 100% fossil fuels in natural gas, what we're saying is we're willing to bet maybe the average household buys 2 lottery tickets a month. They're paying $200 a month in energy costs in natural gas to heat their homes. That's a gamble. That's a $2 gamble per month. That gas bill isn't going to go up when the monopoly comes. We all know how that ended up with our cable bills, right? Okay, so keep that in mind. It is a cost per household. It's a $2 gamble in my mind, but it's a pretty good gamble that I think would pay off in the long term for the entire community, for the entire state in terms of economic resources and what can be provided back to the state. And we're hearing $65 million on top of the numbers that we already have in mind. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you. Great point, great point. Anyone on this side of the room? Yes?
It is on. Good morning, gentlemen. You actually kind of led into my question of the environmental groups, because there are actually quite a few that are moving for green energy that are pro-nuclear, actually very pro-nuclear. There's been a heavy movement with the green energy environmentalists, and I know that in Illinois and Massachusetts, a lot of the climate scientists and environmental leaders actually wrote to the legislation, because I was just curious if there was any contact made with some of these advocate groups or anything, because this is obviously a great thing to do, but obviously with those kinds of groups also get a heavy media attention to add to anything that we would do with these things.
Right. I will say that when FERC asked for commentaries back in September and October, we would get copies of all the commentaries that anybody was submitting for or against trying to protect the nuclear grid. And there were quite a number of out-of-state environmental groups that voiced opinions in favor of protecting the grid here. Unfortunately, they just haven't gotten very local, so we haven't had contact with them. But to Gary's point, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that natural gas has 60% of the emissions that coal does.
Yeah, depending on the plant.
So, I mean, it's, natural gas is maybe natural, but it's not necessarily clean, and it's certainly not as clean as nuclear energy with zero emissions. So, I wish we had more support from a lot of folks, but we're kind of late in the game here, and we really need to get some activity going here in the next couple of weeks if we're going to forestall some of these nasty and permanent decisions from being made. A couple final questions, maybe?
Yes, I understand that you're asking us to consider adding more money to our electric bills. And I haven't heard anything from you gentlemen in regards to what the nuclear plant has proposed to help cut the costs.
Well, I'll answer the question this way, is that none of us up here are representing the company. And so I will not presume to I can't really address that question. What we're concerned with right now is whatever efforts are necessary. When I talked about sharing the pain, perhaps there would be some of that shared with First Energy. But if you don't get the people that are all stakeholders in the room together to figure out how the pain is going to be shared and how we can keep these plants operating, we're just not going to get anywhere. So again, I won't speak for First Energy. This is not a First Energy event. Certainly, if you would like to pose questions to First Energy, I think there's a website you can go do that with. But we need to focus right now on keeping bad decisions from being made, both on an energy policy, from that perspective, as well as from an economic perspective. Yes, sir? Or ma'am, sorry. Yes, right there. Yeah. Yes. Go ahead.
Hi, Commissioner Serino. I followed the Perry Community Forum on Facebook, and I had thought that you had already spoken to Governor Kasich. And if you had, what was the outcome of that conversation?
No, I have not. I have not. We've been trying to get a meeting, and my position right now is I'm not interested in, at this stage of the game, in meeting with underlings. This is something that requires some leadership, and so that request has not been met yet, and it's several weeks old. So we won't stop trying to do it, but hopefully this event will, and the feedback from this event will perhaps help get that to happen. Okay? Dan?
Yeah.
We get a mic, we have a mic down here.
Normally I don't need one, but yeah, I think just a quick point on the one gentleman's question, what about first energy? When we passed the resolution, the Board of Commissioners unanimously, we said, explore every option possible because it's so important to keep this plant open. That included additional charges spread across as wide a base as possible to lessen the impact on consumers, but also said corporate contributions. We think First Energy needs to maybe look at stockholder dividends that have been pretty healthy lately, and maybe there has to be some pain and sacrifice there. So there's got to be a lot of combinations to make this happen. It's just I've been around a long time, and I mean Perry Nuclear Power Plant has been so important to this county. Not only, and I want to echo too, the workers that have worked there. When this thing was first proposed, there were people saying, "Oh my God, this is going to be a disaster. People are going to be poisoned by radiation, etc." The safety record and the skills of the workers of that plant over the years have been outstanding, and you should be saluted for running what has just been a remarkable record of safety. There's a lot of things going on. I know Commissioner Serino's going to Philadelphia. I'm going to the Ohio Energy Conference, an annual conference in Columbus on Tuesday and Wednesday, where there'll be a lot of discussion about really Ohio needing to establish a formal energy policy. But I think, as the speakers have indicated, I've been in government a long time. When we do budgeting, we try to have a diversified source of revenue. If we're depending on one source of revenue to deal with what we have to spend on behalf of providing the services of civilization, we're asking for trouble. And I think that's the same thing that has to happen in energy policy. If you're dependent on one fossil fuel source, natural gas, and you don't have a diversified energy generation stream coming in, you're asking for trouble. I think when a lot of this happened was early in this century when the legislature passed electric deregulation. I was not a member of the legislature at the time. I did not favor that. Had I been there, I would not have voted for that, because what that says was, let's let the marketplace decide. Let's not have any type of stability or regulatory long-range planning. Let's let the marketplace decide. So if apples are selling for this much a barrel over at this store this week, that's where you shop. You can't do energy policy that way. So and I knew that was bad news for Lake County, because we had two major generating facilities in this county. We had the Perry Nuclear Power Plant and the East Lake Coal Fire Plant. It was not going to be in the best interest of Lake County, but the legislature went and enacted that, and I think we're paying the price for it now, because you've taken away some of the regulatory stability that would be necessary in order to protect the long-range existence of this particular plant. One other issue, where are they getting their pants beat off them competitively at First Aid? They're getting beat up by the natural gas industry. And what has happened is all that fracking that has been taking place in southeastern Ohio has generated a lot of gas, has driven the price down. They're tearing up the landscape. God knows what they're injecting into the ground down there. God knows what they're doing to the roads. And why isn't that industry regulated as strictly as the nuclear power industry is? In fact, what is really appalling is that the legislature won't even impose a reasonable severance tax on that industry compared to what is imposed on that industry in West Virginia and in Pennsylvania. And obviously that puts First Energy and the nuclear generators at a disadvantage because they're paying taxes on what they're doing, but you have another industry that's leading a charmed life in terms of, and you get statements out of the legislature that, well, this is an emerging industry and we don't want to stifle it with taxes. Well, what that non-stifling is doing is putting Perry in jeopardy. I don't know, you talk about the environmentalists, whether you believe in global warming or not, I know there's a lot of people that, I can tell you right now, that water vapor coming out of that cooling tower isn't contributing anything to global warming, so I think that's an important issue too. I think, as Commissioner Serino said, there's got to be a compromise here, there's got to be a lot of pain and suffering suffered by a lot of different people, but the way I've always believed is you get these things done by compromise. Everybody's going to have to give something, but I think it's very important that we keep this plan open. It's meant so much to this area, not only just Perry schools, but if you recall, there are 4 school districts that share in the revenue of that plan. Madison schools, Painesville local schools, and Riverside schools are all part of what's called a joint financing district. That I carried the legislation on that Senate bill in the House, and again, it's just meant so much to this county. The jobs are so important, the tax base is so important. I'm with you, we got to do everything possible to keep this plan open. I know it's an uphill battle, but thank you for all being here today.
One or two more questions, if you raise your hand. Yes, you get a microphone over to this end. Oh, you have one? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been standing for a second, but one of the things, I agree with everything that Commissioner Troy just said. I agree with Representative Young, and you as well, Commissioner Serino. And it's good that we have this meeting, and hopefully we'll come out of this meeting with some directions to impress the governor and possibly impress some of the residents of those 42 counties that have been living with the benefit of money from the nuclear power plant since the beginning, when I was involved in the beginning. And one thing I would like to say, my past expertise was in accounting. I'm a numbers guy. I like to see numbers. I like to see what the impact is going to be on those 42 counties. What's the percentage for your passing millage to make up those losses? What's that going to cost? And spreadsheets and barcodes, or not barcodes, but graphs and all that stuff. And that's good stuff to go into any argument with anybody and show them. Saying it is nebulous. Doesn't mean a whole lot when you say it, because what's the actual number? Now, I don't know who can do that. I don't know if the representative can do that with staff in Columbus. I don't know if the commissioners can do that. I don't know if the trustees can put together someone who can put those numbers together, because that's a statewide issue. So it's a difficult thing to do, but to me, it's an important thing. If you really want to sit down and start talking apples and apples and oranges and oranges, you're going to have to get that kind of detail together. Otherwise, it's all emotion, and maybe we can compromise, maybe we can find the emotion's going to work in the end, but I like numbers, I like to see facts.
Great.
Thank you.
Numbers don't lie. Numbers don't lie. By the way,
Well, they do lie.
you wouldn't happen to be the guy who asking me all the numbers questions on my Facebook page, are you?
No.
Oh, okay. Darn, I was hoping to meet that guy. Other questions? Yes.
One thing I want to point out, I don't know if other people received them. I received the robocalls from the opposition, apparently to the legislation, which I'm assuming it sounded like it was being funded by the gas industry. I don't know if there's any effort in place to try to blunt that through any kind of, because apparently those are probably going down to the southern parts of Ohio, reaching out to the rest of the electorate, and I don't know if there's any effort to try to blunt that, anything organized in that regard.
I wasn't aware of the robocalls. I don't have a landline, so I'm fortunate. But we don't have a lobbying unit sort of representing the plant or our community, unfortunately. So we don't have budget for those kinds of things, et cetera. So I think the best way we can blunt it is with our voice, which really has to be loud and clear today. And again, I apologize that a lot of what I had to say in the last half of my discussion was perhaps blunt and a little bit dour. But I wanted everybody in the community to know what could be coming up in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So you don't pick up the News Herald or the Gazette, got the young lady from the Gazette here, or watch on television that some major thing has happened. These are things that I mentioned and I enumerated are very, in my opinion, likely to happen in some combination, which means that we've got to get a solution. And as Commissioner Troy mentioned, absolutely, we have to have a compromise here. But you can't have a compromise if you don't get all the right people in the room at some point, at some level, and figure out what they can give up and what they can give in on in order to get things done here. And we have to get that going here. And I really can't tell you enough. When you leave here, go to your computer, go to your phone, get the contact information, and get messaging out, and talk to 10 people that you know and ask them to do the same thing. There has to be a flurry of contacts with the governor's office in order to get some attention. Yes, sir.
If we cannot get the governor's attention on this, who do we go to?
Well, at the state level, I mean, obviously all your state representatives and state senators, state representatives, and their information is available online, but I mean, certainly go to them as well. We've got to get them motivated, particularly outside of this area. The governor is the chief executive of our state. And just like the governors of Illinois, New York, and New Jersey have done, they've taken steps and shown leadership with their legislatures to get things done and protect nuclear power in a community's economy. And I mean, we're pursuing the federal stuff, but I will tell you one quick anecdote. When Mayor Clow and I, Mayor Clow couldn't be here, he's out of town now, has been working with us very much as well. We were sitting in Washington in Congressman Joyce's office and having a conversation with the then chairman of FERC. And one of the things he started out by saying, he was a very nice man and was very receptive to what we had to say. And one of the things he said to me was, "What's with your people in Ohio? Why are so many people against us?" And he enumerated and specified names. And it was kind of embarrassing for us to be hat in hand there talking with FERC, with Congressman Joyce's help, asking for recognition. I handed him 2,000 petitions, which many of you in this room helped us with, and thank you, by the way. He was very impressed with the petitions, but he said, "Why isn't your governor on board with this? Why aren't his utility advisors and economic development advisors pushing this with him?" And they're hearing about that at the federal level, and it probably blunts their interest in jumping in and helping us when we're not apparently to them ready to jump in and help ourselves. So let's just make our efforts when we get home today to make those contacts.
I think another thing too, if this governor's going to be there 10 more months, okay? And I know do we have enough time? We're hoping we have enough time. What's really important now, you've got people running that want to be the next governor. Whether that's going to be Mr. DeWine or Mary Taylor, or it's going to be Dennis Kucinich or Rich Cordray. This is the time to get into their policymakers' heads about how important this issue is and get them on record that when they become governor, one of them in January of 2019, that they're committed to do something here. So I think, keep working on the guy that's there now, but you're going to get a lot more attention for the people that want that job right now, and maybe a lot more agreement on our position.
I just had a thought. I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner, but we have folks surrounding the State House on a regular basis, all pushing for a specific cause of some sort. The legislators, we all go into session, we walk by crowds of people carrying signs, whatever, and that does have an impact. It does have an impact. It doesn't always win the day, but it has an impact. I'm just curious, how many people here would be willing, if we could organize such a thing? Of course, we talked to the people in Ottawa County, other people around the state that might have an interest. How many people here would be willing to make such a trip to Columbus to pick this kind of event? Okay, very good. So we're looking at more than half of the folks here. Let's organize. Let's organize. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, anything final? So what is everybody going to do when you get home? I'm sorry. Okay, remember, this was a rally. Okay, this is not Sunday services, it's only Saturday. Okay, and again, I apologize, I know that some of the news and some of the predictions are not necessarily what you would like to hear and what we would all like to hear, but the message here, I think, I'm going to go back to Dr. Thompson's comments, which were very positive and hopeful. Let's not give up. Lake County's community is a phenomenal community. We have vibrancy here, and we are a community that takes care of one another, time after time after time. And so let's not leave here feeling negative. Let's leave here really all in on going after what we want. We want the Perry plant to remain open and operating, in our 700 employees and their families benefiting from that, in our total Lake County economy benefiting from that. And that's only going to happen if your voice is heard in Columbus. Thank you very much, and be sure to see the media on the way out. I'm sure they're interested in your stories. Thank you for coming today.